Walt Weiskopf, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to see you, Sean.
It's great to see you too. Um, uh, I was mentioning before we started rolling that um, uh, you have a lot of uh, great books. You've got a lot of great books, and I think that musicians that are out of work right now and that have a lot of time to practice,
That includes me.
I think that they would be well served by picking up some of your books.
Well, thank you.
Um, and I'm on your website right now, and I'm looking at your books. And first of all, I own all of your books.
Oh, thanks, Sean.
I want to tell you, and I have imposed my will on my students, causing them to also purchase uh, said periodicals.
Well, thank you. Hope it's helpful.
Oh, it's so helpful. One of the books that was really transformative for me, and I think it was for a lot of players, is that intervallic improvisation book.
Oh, thanks.
You know, such a systematic approach to that concept, and one that I regularly refer to. I encourage my students to check the book out. I think it's the most complete resource on that topic. There's a couple other books on that, and as a matter of fact, in my book, How to Improvise Over Chord Changes, um, I have a chapter where I talk about triad pairs, but it is nowhere near as thorough and worked out as your book is.
Oh, it's nice
Uh,
to hear. Thank you.
and I have to admit that some of my terminology has been also influenced by your Around the Horn book.
Oh, well, thanks.
And that was actually a book that I required my students to have in their for applied lessons, and we
Oh,
regularly worked out of that book.
I'm
Um,
honored. Thank you.
the Giant Steps book is great.
Yes,
Goodness, that
that goes back, geez, 30 years or something.
man, and that Beyond the Horn book is really interesting because it's sort of taking the around the horn concept and then using that octave displacement concept,
Yeah,
which
that was
is
a student of mine, Ed Rosenberg, who was so talented, and he came in one day and started doing that, and it literally my head popped off, and I said, "Man, I guess I better start trying to practice this stuff." And so we did. We would play that every week in lessons, and it's terrific for flexibility and just getting you to blow through the horn. Not to mention trying to get away from always kind of depending on smaller intervals, minor seconds, and whole steps and minor thirds, but trying to maybe think outside the box a little bit. And even though it's it's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but in each of these, all the stuff that I've written down, it's really basically kind of a selfish thing for me. It's just what I was practicing at the time, and uh, I guess in a way, just writing it down kind of helped me to organize myself. And I just figured if I could help myself like this, then maybe it's beneficial to write it down and make it available.
yeah. I'm so glad that you did that and you're willing to share because we've been great beneficiaries of that.
Oh, it's so nice to hear.
Yeah. Um, so I was trying to in my head go back to when we first met, and I think it would have been, let's see here, it was either like 97 or 98.
That sounds
Uh,
right. Western
Trent,
Michigan.
yeah, that's right. Trent Keniston,
Yep.
um, and I interviewed him for one of these also.
Oh, great.
That was a I owe him so much. I did my undergrad and my master's degree there,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, you don't realize um, when you have a really good teacher, you don't realize how impactful and how important it is
I
until
agree.
many years later.
Yep.
And I find myself saying a lot of what he said to me,
Hmm.
you know. Um, but he went on sabbatical, and then he had like Seamus Blake and Chris Potter and you and there was a couple other guys that he had come in and do kind of like 1 week long residencies, and
Hmm.
so his whole studio got lessons, and um, it was very cool. I remember quite vividly our lesson, and we didn't play a lot. We played a little bit, but we didn't really play a lot. We talked, and I remember one of the things that you said to me that really stuck, because at that time I was all about symmetrical patterns. I was playing a lot of diminished patterns, whole tone patterns, and I found all these different ways to play them over whatever kind of changes. And you said to me, that sounds, that sounds great. You're always very um, gracious, and that sounds really great, but make sure that you're getting stuff in 12 keys. Make sure you're working the diatonic stuff too. You know,
I was
and
talking to myself probably too.
and but that was it was a transformative moment for me, because I really, after that point, I really doubled down on making sure all the diatonic stuff was really happening in 12 keys.
Hmm.
Um,
I think that's the best practice there is. That's kind of my practice pretty much on a daily basis right now.
so, um, another way that you've been influential on my life, on my playing, is uh, I asked you some questions about a couple of the books that you had published. Um, I think I think that Intervallic improvisation book would have been out by then, right?
Pretty
Uh,
sure.
yeah. And so I was talking to you because I had some ideas for publishing, and you gave me some really sound advice. That really helped me to, I think, slow down and make sure that the material that I wanted to present was much more uh, codified and clearer, and and it worked out because uh, you know the book has been published on Hal Leonard, and it's the company that I
That's
wanted,
terrific.
and
That's
and I
wonderful.
owe thank you, and I owe to both you and Trent uh, for some really great advice on uh, some steps that I could take as far as trying to get published
That's
and
terrific.
really having the material together. So I appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for the mention. I'm glad that
I,
was helpful.
I can go on like this for a long time. Uh, one,
All right.
uh, one more thing I want to say uh, about this, and then I want people to hear you talk, because they've already heard me talk quite a bit. Um, one thing that you said to me, um, and I've heard you say this in master classes, um, and it's something that I stole, and I say to my students all the time, is never perform in the practice room.
Mm.
Never perform in the practice room. Um, that really that really stuck, and it's a I think it's a challenge that all of us have, um, and especially logistically in a
No
school of
question.
music or a conservatory where other people can hear you when you're practicing.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me that, you know, when you're in the practice room, everyone deserves to sound bad, to have that sort of place where they can, you
Yeah.
know, um,
Work stuff out.
uh, yeah, work stuff out. And if you don't have that, you're not gonna improve. So
Yeah.
so Walt, can you tell us about yourself? Tell us where you're from and where you grew up and what your childhood was like.
I grew up outside of Syracuse, New York, and I was very lucky in that I had a very good music program all through school. I played clarinet from fourth grade, and I always wanted to play saxophone pretty much from the moment I heard my cousin, who was a year older than I, played saxophone, and I guess we were in the 6th grade or something like that. And I kept begging my parents for a saxophone, and finally, in the 8th grade, they relented, and I was pretty much hooked. Although I played clarinet all through school, and when I went to college at the Eastman School of Music, I focused on the saxophone, and I was kind of young and thought I knew everything, and very headstrong, and I really didn't take to, at that time there was no jazz major, which for me was probably a good thing because we got to study jazz in an organized way, but we had to be classical saxophone majors. And if I had not had that discipline, I can't imagine that I would have become proficient in the way that I did, because I was just essentially forced to learn that repertoire, and that really goes a long way to developing facility and the fluidity on the instrument. And I tell anybody who will listen, especially when I taught in later years, that if you want to play some jazz, you have to have some mastery of the instrument before you do that. And you can work on both those things at the same time to an extent, but you cannot neglect basic mastery of the instrument. And sometimes jazz programs can be a challenge, because oftentimes kids who were coming into college at that age, I know for a fact that I would not have been mature enough at all to get that together on my own. So jazz programs these days, they have to have kind of a tangential way to have young people master the instrument. I remember when I was in college, a good analogy for this is we had the option of taking either orchestration or jazz arranging. So if you were turned off by the idea of classical orchestration, you could take jazz arranging, which of course is what I did. And even though we all thought we were real cool and learning about jazz, it's the same basic information as orchestration. And there has to be an organized way of teaching you the instrument. And if it's not your thing to learn classical saxophone repertoire, there has to be something else other than trying to just blow over changes. There has to be written material to work on. There has to be arpeggios and scales and etudes. All this stuff is going to serve you very well in the long run. So that's what I did. Of course, that was back in, I entered college in '77, and I finished in 3 years before they realized that they didn't want to do that anymore. So I was pretty much out on my own, and then all of a sudden realized, now what am I going to do? So I moved to New York, very, very green, and had no idea really what to do. As a matter of fact, I didn't even own a tenor at that time. When I moved to New York, I had my alto, and I began trying to play at jam sessions and had a really good time. Didn't really know what I was doing, and I was very, very inexperienced. I was really not at all ready to be there, but it was, to beat an overused metaphor, it was baptism by fire, and I heard other people play, and I basically just practiced and worked, and I had to do day jobs, of course, but for several years I would just go play in the street and play all the things you are for 3 or 4 hours in the street and come back with $10, and I thought I had a successful day if I did that. I did that for more months than I care to count, but that's the kind of stuff that I did. And eventually I had an opportunity to join the Buddy Rich Band in 1981, and as a matter of fact, I bought my first tenor for that job, and I stayed there for a couple years, and then I realized I wanted to stop and kind of set down roots in New York and try and be in one place at one time. I had other opportunities to travel, but I at that time I had I had had enough of that life for the time being. I was actually lucky enough after maybe a year or so to join the Toshiko Akiyoshi big band, which had just relocated in New York. So that was in a way for me was the best of both worlds because we didn't go on the road for 9, 10 months a year like other road bands. That band was more along the lines of we would go to Japan for 3, 4 weeks, and we had a steady gig in Manhattan, different clubs. Lush Life was one. Fat Tuesdays was one. The Bottom Line. So every week we'd play in town and do isolated tours. And for me, that was kind of my formative way to really kind of get myself together. And I practiced during the day and scraped by with not very much money. And I stayed with that band for 14 years. And over the years, I realized I had to be a little more methodical and practical. And I did commercial work increasingly. Worked a lot on Broadway and in the studios. And during the whole kind of process, I began to record and write music on my own and began to record as a leader. And let's see, I taught certainly for, I taught 23 years, never full time like you're doing, but I did have a lot of great experiences and learned a lot from my students. There's one thing about teaching, which I'm sure you can attest. Once you start teaching, you realize you have to know what you're talking about. And it didn't take me long to realize that in a lot of ways I really had no idea what I was talking about, because I think a lot of this stuff I just learned by ear. When I was young, there weren't materials like there are now. I learned a lot by ear. I had good teachers, and I transcribed mostly. I didn't even understand what a blues was for the most part until I got to college and I got a little more instruction. But at the time, I kind of thought I knew what I was doing. But when I began to teach, then I really realized I had to organize myself more methodically. And 3 years ago, I decided I wanted to make a change and really focus on my performance and my practice, and moved down to Richmond, Virginia, and was able to stop teaching. So that's kind of where I've been. And that's enabled me to practice on a more regular basis, which I really enjoy. And maybe, one possible side effect of that is that I have put away the flute and the clarinet, which, that's just a necessary evil, I suppose, because at a certain point I realized I didn't want to have to worry about, the not having the time or the energy to try and master one thing really well. And I have to pick something, and that's kind of the tenor saxophone and my writing and my performance. So that's what I have done. And I feel good about it. It's kind of sad that I don't play the clarinet because that was my first instrument. But I really have gotten into some stuff that I have been wanting to get to for many years. I kept telling myself, you got to play Hot House in 12 keys. For years and years, I'd say, why can't I do that? Well, the bottom line is I just never had the time to do it. So now I can do it. So if anybody wants to hear it, it's just kind of that is me kind of practicing what I preach. I always kind of try and organize myself in that there's practice for practice sake, and that's taking one thing and learning it well. And there's also you mentioned earlier on that I said don't get in the habit of trying to perform all the time in the practice room. That's true, but there's also a practical aspect of needing to perfect your material and what you're going to play on the job. So I try and divide myself kind of equally, and sometimes just by necessity. So if I have something coming up that demands my attention, I go back to my repertoire, and of course, tunes that I've written and performed, these tunes need to be maintained and practiced and worked on as well. So the interesting thing about our current situation is I have nothing coming up in way of performance. So this is the time to really get into the kind of aesthetic, the ivory tower about what practice is, and to see where that really can go. So for so long, I kept saying, hey, I got to play the flute every day if I want to be able to play this show tonight. But now I don't have to do that. So it's really been I don't sit here and practice 4 hours a day, but I do practice every day for at least an hour, maybe an hour and hour and a half if I really get going. Try and do some writing, and just looking forward to kind of getting back out there. And who knows when that's going to be, but we all hope it'll be fairly soon. Maybe hopefully later this year, next year.
Yeah, this is one thing that I see a lot of because musicians are just trying to figure out how to adjust to this pandemic. You know, um, you know, even myself, I look at the dozens of gigs that just evaporated. Like overnight. I had to cancel the 43rd annual Ohio State Jazz Festival, which
Heartbreaking.
yeah, well, and it's not just everybody has had to, and people have had to do worse things.
Yeah.
But I certainly didn't want to be, in the history of that festival, I didn't want to be the guy that canceled it.
No
It's
choice.
but you just have to do what you have to do. Um, but I think in adjusting, we're seeing a lot of uh, online instruction and performances, um, and with varying degrees of effectiveness and proficiency with that medium. Um, uh, we're also seeing folks that have sort of been in that space for quite a while. Um, this seems to like have actually caused them to really take some traction, and now they're able to spend more time working on that. Um, and something I've been talking to my students about is I know it might seem cliche to do a multicam video or to even learn the skills to be able to do that, but um, and I know that the market is totally flooded with that right now. But when else are you going to have the time to develop that skill to be able to do that?
I agree.
Um, you
I've
know,
bought some gear I never thought I'd get
yeah,
because I do want to be able to contribute in the way that we can. And and this is pretty low tech what we have here, but I bought a couple microphones, and I hear that the guys in LA are doing some studio work that way, and we all have to adapt and adjust. And I think in the long run, these are good skills to have.
yeah, and someone like yourself that has a you have a diverse set of skills. I mean, you're an author. Um,
By default. I mean, only because I had no gigs at the time, so I might as well use my time constructively.
well, that's a nice deflection there, um, but you have these books. You've got this stuff. It's been available online for a long time, and so do you have any other sort of projects in mind? What are you working on right now? Are you working on maybe a book, or are you working on? I heard you say that you're doing some composing and arranging and things. Um,
I am. I'm trying to. I actually have an album coming out this month that was recorded right before everything happened with my quartet in Europe, and very excited about that. It was recorded in Copenhagen in February, and it's coming out beginning the way they do this stuff now is they kind of hold it back. So one track's coming out in May, one in June, one in July, and then the whole thing will be out July. So uh, I don't know uh, if that's going to be a physical CD. It never occurred to me that I would make a recording and I wouldn't, but I'm trying to kind of figure out whether that's in the cards, if that's obsolete, or if I should still work toward that. So maybe by next year that'll become clear. Uh, but I have been doing. I don't have any plans for any books. I kind of feel like that's part of the choice that I made was basically that I really just want to practice and play, but I do um, feel pretty good about some instructional videos that I've done for my music masterclass. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those. It's a terrific site, and um, they have asked me to do something basically, from my desk here. So I'm going to try and organize myself and do that, and just working on a little bit of that today in preparation for. Obviously, I have no deadline, but I would like to get that together. Quite a bit of work for jazzimprovisation.com, Jim Snydero's project, jazzconception.com, I think is they're two URLs. Um, and I kind of cut my teeth doing the whole video thing, to the point where I'm more or less, I can be kind of coherent about it. But actually, what I realized, silver lining, glass half full kind of guy that I am, is that when I move forward with this, that I can do as many takes as I want until I get it halfway coherent. So yesterday, maybe a couple of days ago, I got an email. Maybe you got the same one from a guy in Spain who wants to put together kind of a novelty video with all kinds of saxophone players playing one tune. And I won't tell you too much about it because I don't want to spoil his thunder. So he asked me to, he gave me the tune, and he wanted the head and two choruses, and gave me the tempo, and said, make sure you use a metronome or however you make sure, because everyone's going to play the same thing, and then he's going to splice it together. So maybe he'll have, somebody play the first four bars of the head, and then somebody else will play the next four bars, that kind of thing. So he's going to put this all together, and I mean, it's a great concept. So I figured, okay, this will go quick. I'm going to just bang this out, and I got myself the microphone, and I put my phone on the tripod, and I literally did this for 2 hours, trying to play the head and two choruses in a way that was not completely embarrassing. And man, I'm here to tell you, I am humbled that.
I'm. I mean, you're a great player. So there's, obviously, but I'm not surprised that you had that experience just because of the sort of precision that you expect from yourself, the stuff that you want to come out of the horn, and when you see it back, it's like, probably you're probably the 1% percentile person.
I guess, but as you say, you want to be represented in a certain way,
Yeah.
and trying to do something like that all by yourself is unfamiliar. It's really different. I don't think I've ever tried to do that in that way. It's always, playing with somebody else it's just easier. So that, I think, is it can be a learning experience, and I really did learn from that and know how to maybe move forward a little bit better in my practice.
Yeah, I mean, and I've got there's a couple more that this guy wants me to do. I've done a couple of those multicam things. And the first, and I've done a good amount of studio work, and on my own projects, and things. A couple of those projects were recorded at my parents' house.
Mm-hmm.
We have studio stuff, so I know my way around a studio, but playing to a camera and everything happening perfectly, plus the video looking a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
and in conjunction with something that is not present with you, is really, it shouldn't be like just assumed that would be an easy thing to do.
I agree, no question. These are all tangential skills. You never think about this stuff.
Yeah.
But a good, for me, an example is learning notation software. I'm surprised at how many of our peers, young people who are computer literate don't use notation software to the extent that they should, in my opinion. It's just a
Right.
tool that you have to have. It'd be like not having a telephone. I mean, you have to have this stuff under your fingers. And I am absolutely guilty of not being on the ball as far as the whole home studio thing. I was just not, there's only so many hours in the day, and I never got the whole MIDI thing together. I just haven't. I have just chosen to focus my energies in different ways. So now is the time. Not that I'm going to get into a whole lot of that. I'm not going to get Pro Tools. I'm not going there. But I would like to be able to function enough so that I can contribute and as in as useful a way that I can. I mean, when somebody says, "Can you send me this track?" and it shouldn't be an obstacle. So I'm a relatively resourceful person, and these are things that you just have to get it together. It would be like not being able to answer an email. Some stuff you just have to have together. It doesn't matter how talented you are and how much you practice if nobody knows. So it's the tree falls in the forest concept.
Okay. So my students at Ohio State, did you hear what Walt Weiskopf just said?
It's always better when somebody else says it. When you do it every week, it doesn't have the same effect. Whenever somebody else comes to says it, then they say, "Oh, wow, well, he said it too." So Sean must know what he was talking about.
That's right. I'll pay you later for saying all that stuff, by the way. Um, Walt, was there a moment? Well, okay. So I wanted to make a couple comments. So first, um, so clarinet, alto saxophone, and then later tenor saxophone. Was that the order?
I played clarinet first, right, and then
And
alto
then out.
sax, and then actually I got myself a flute and banged my head against the wall. Actually, bent a flute in half when I was a junior in high school because I was frustrated. And then I got a tenor when after I moved to New York, as I said, in 19, I guess that was must have been 1980.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've been asking other artists some of these same questions, and when I ask them about their upbringing and what they started playing first and like that, I've noticed that there have been Doug Lawrence. He told me the same thing. It was clarinet, alto, tenor. Of course, we know that was the case with Coltrane.
Mm-hmm.
Um, J.D. Allen told me the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it seems like that's like a common a a common progression. For
Mm-hmm.
me, I started on alto saxophone and then tenor and soprano with flute, and then many like 10 years later than when I started playing. Then I picked up clarinet. So clarinet was the last woodwind for me, which which is interesting. Actually, Pete Mills, and I know you know Pete Mills well. I interviewed him also. We live in the same town, and we're good.
Columbus.
Yeah, we're good friends, and we've played on a bunch of projects together. We both play in the Columbus Jazz Orchestra. I'm not a permanent member, but he is, and we play regularly in that band. And he had a lot of really really great things to say about his experience taking lessons with you.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
Um, oh yeah, and he's the same thing. He started on clarinet,
Mm-hmm.
then alto saxophone, then tenor saxophone. I just think, and I know that that was a common thing that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's just interesting. Like, uh,
It is
uh,
interesting because I think that I'm not sure. Well, maybe you can probably speak to this uh, more than I can because I haven't done as much teaching in the past couple of years. But it seems when I was young, my friends and I, we didn't have all the horns.
mhm.
Nobody had alto and tenor when we came to school, and that to me, it seems like it's different now. Kids seem to. Well, I guess one thing is that there's not as much of a focus on doubling. and it's not a judgment thing. I'm just kind of observing that when I was in school, we were expected to play flute and clarinet. Period. End of story. And that was kind of how you moved up in the ranks of what band you were in school. And I don't know that that's the case now. Certainly, it doesn't seem to be as universal. It seems to be more of a I didn't see this coming either until I got maybe to take a step back from it. But there was studying the saxophone in that you had to play the classical repertoire and you were expected to play jazz. Jazz playing is something that's kind of a separate offshoot, which again, that's getting back to what I worry about a little bit, is that there can be a neglect of mastery of the instrument. So I'd like to think that there's a way to, I hate to have to have that be so narrow, but I understand it because you really have to focus your energies if you want to master a particular thing. Particularly now, you really want to get as good as you possibly can. I observed this when I was in New York. There are young players who really are just not interested in jazz playing. When they were in college, they focused their energies on doubling, for instance, because they wanted to go to New York and work. And it makes perfect sense. So I was a couple generations older, and my peers and I were trying to do all those things at the same time. And at a certain point, you do have to make some choices. When I was young, I had friends who were, as a matter of fact, when I was in high school, I had some bassoon going on. And I had a teacher who was very, very excited about me, and he wanted me to study bassoon as a major in college. And I mean, I just had to make a choice. And for a while, I kind of tried to keep that going. I'd get the bassoon from the school, the instrument library, and I would go to my practice room and play a little bit. But at a certain point, I just realized I don't have what it takes to do all this stuff at the same time. But there are players who did do that, who ended up playing either bassoon or, let's say, oboe at quite a high level, and still managed to be great jazz players. I mean, it's a pretty short list, but I can think of younger peers of mine, Dan Willis, Tom Christensen, Charles Pillow. These guys are all on a very high level, playing all the flute, clarinet, saxophone. Great jazz players, great composers, and they had this other kind of quill and arrow in their quill and playing a double reed at a high level. But I don't think that's certainly not common. But I made a decision long ago that I couldn't go there. I had my hands full. And then, as I say, I of late, I've had the luxury to just kind of step that down, and I just basically play the tenor.
So, something that I tell my students all the time is, if you play saxophone, that means you play flute and clarinet also. I mean, I tell them that constantly. And the reason I tell them that is, so my philosophy, it's like a triangle. And what happens is, when you start your career, you're on the bottom. And on the bottom has to be able to support more weight and do more stuff. And then as you move up the triangle closer to the top, you don't have to do as much stuff. You can reduce the amount of stuff that you're doing and try to get to the point where you're really sort of laser focused on the thing that only you can do. And unfortunately, most people never get to the place where they can peel that other stuff off. And they end up basically having to kind of carry a lot of stuff for their entire career, and that's fine if they I like variety. I like to be able to do other things, and I get bored easily. And so I think doing some other things is cool. But I also see the strength of your what you're talking about. I'm constantly asking myself, okay, do I really need to learn another instrument? Do I really need to even play the instruments that I play? Is this really a good use of my time? And then of course this thing hit, and
These are
then
very hard choices. I'm tortured by this stuff constantly. I mean, should I spend some time and get with the piano more? I mean, I'd love to, believe me, I'd love to play the drums. I really would love to, but the bottom line is, I'm not that talented. I need the time to do uh, what I do, and it's not just about playing blues and 12 keys on the tenor. I have to write some music. That's important to me professionally and spiritually too. It's just part of uh, part of our craft. I mean, when you consider, this is another thing I think about a lot. How many jazz musicians that you and I have looked up to over the years got to where they are, to the point that we revere them, without writing their own music? So it's a pretty short list. Most musicians that we look up to wrote their own music.
yeah.
It's the exception that they were so virtuosic they didn't. But even most jazz musicians whom we look up to, even if we don't think of them as composers in the way that, let's say, Wayne Shorter is a composer, or even Herbie Hancock as a composer. I mean, brilliant people, but most jazz musicians write their own tunes. That's just part of the job. So that's something that I think about a lot, and uh, I don't know that I would ever stop doing that. That's just kind of part of what we do.
Something else that that I learned from you, something that you it seems like a common thing that you would say is, you got to do these three things. You got to write, you got to perform, and you got to teach. Um, and Now, in your case, I think in some people's case, it might not be that you're teaching at an institution. You could be doing things like master classes, like this thing you're talking about. You could be publishing books, you know, um, and but those three streams, and that's something that's like a philosophy that I've lived by, and it's something that I constantly talk to my students about. And again, the idea is that so I did a presentation. It was a panel discussion and presentation at Ohio State a few years ago, and it was called "The Power of Yes: uh, uh, Developing a what is it? Developing a skill set for a life as a professional musician or for a career in the music industry." And one of the things I talked about in that presentation is that um, you know when you're fresh out, you just finish your degree. Okay, now it's time to work, and hopefully this would start before you actually finish the degree. You you pretty much have to tell everybody yes to everything. I mean, you can't do anything yet. So you're not born with experience, and so you're going to have to say yes to stuff that you haven't done before. And the strength of a quality education is that at least it gives you a rounded enough, but then also directional enough, education, so that no matter what it is within the field of performance, for instance, that you can kind of do that you can kind of get there. And you'll probably be really nervous the first time you do it and feel embarrassed and everything, when it doesn't go exactly the way you want it to. But that's really kind of we're stuck with that. We don't really have another way to go.
Absolutely, that's just the nature of what we do. And I guess through that process, as you say, I think I love the triangle analogy, because it's hard at, at first when you're really you don't have the luxury of saying no. But there's that in between ground, and I recall on many occasions having the experience of, should I agree to do this, because I don't really know. I know I'm not really the guy, but maybe I just try and think my way through it. And is that, am I going to fake it till I make it? Is that going to work? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Um, those decisions are tough decisions. And I think a lot of that is just prepare as much as you possibly can. But as much as you prepare, it's not really going to be the same as being in the hot seat. And
That's
that's
right.
something you also have to be. That's an experience thing too. That's just a question of experience, and there's really no substitute for it, as I'm sure you tell your students all the time. As much as you can sit in the hot seat in school, it's not going to be the same as when you're out there and you don't have the kind of the umbrella or the shelter of academia. It's a completely different experience, and that really is. There's no substitute for that other than just putting yourself in that position again and again, and you get better at it. It's nerve wracking, but you can get used to being a little nervous. Sometimes if you're a little bit nervous, that's okay. You can learn to manage that. You can learn to use it.
Yeah, something on the sort of nerves conversation, which of course is a regular conversation that that happens in school. Um, I I always tell my students, I get nervous every time I play.
I do too.
Um,
I guess
and
maybe that's good. I mean, it makes you feel young, and it makes
yeah,
you feel alive. And I guess if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. Uh,
yeah, yeah,
I totally agree.
yeah. My the way I talk to them is I say, if you're nervous, it just means you're human.
Absolutely.
And I said, now, and this is always my joke, and I'll be like in a studio class and there'll be like 15 or 16 saxophone players. And I was like, no, I say, well, now there may be one person in here, and uh, maybe you don't get nervous at all. Um, you're a sociopath. And there's a reason why my wife doesn't want me to share my address. I don't want to. So always do that because I think it's important to normalize humanity.
Absolutely.
I
Performing is a very strange thing when you think about it. It's okay to recognize that you feel nerves. I definitely feel nerves. I I feel nerves in teaching situations too. I'd rather play than do a master class. Absolutely, I'm much more at ease playing. Um, Whenever I'm out with my quartet and we're asked to do well, if I'm asked to do master class, I always say, "Can you guys come with me?" Because I would much rather play. And once you play a couple tunes, then you kind of get loosened up and you can talk. Um, but nerves are just a fact of life. And as you say, I mean, if you're not nervous, then you might sound. I mean, it's good to. Here's an analogy I use a lot of the time, which is it's a lot about acting. Um, Acting is a great analogy. It's analogous to what we do because there's always going to be a lapse in concentration. That's just natural. The trick is you don't want to show your hand. There's no reason to let anybody else know that you've had a lapse in concentration if you absolutely can avoid it. I do my absolute best to look the part and pretend like everything is going great and that I'm not rattled, I'm not nervous, and sometimes I really do feel great. And sometimes I don't feel so great. I have that weird thing. I'm outside myself. Am I doing okay? It's okay. It's okay. The trick is to just keep. Actually, I remember hearing this. I forget who told me this, but this is a great tip. Keep putting air through the horn. Just put one foot in front of the other. It's natural to have a lapse. Nobody has to know that you've had a lapse. Remember that famous, I'm bad with titles, where he goes to the bridge too early and then you can hear him go, ah. So I'm sure if I, unless I must my guess, he looked back on that and said, geez, if I hadn't uttered that groan, I mean, who's going to really know? There might be a few musicians out here that know, but uh, a thing to try and learn is you don't have to show your hand. You're a performer. Nobody's really interested in seeing that you're acknowledging a mistake. People want to see a performance.
So I have to ask you about practicing because, again, I feel like uh, I learned a lot about the way that I approached the practice room from you, and so it makes me very interested in what it is that you're practicing now. In understand, I'm not asking you. Um, I'm not asking you sort of like what have you practiced um, uh, or even like fundamental stuff like uh, like I know sometimes like when somebody asks me that, like if a student asks me what do you practice, in my head, since I know the student, I may steer towards some things that I know that they need to be working on,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll try to give them some other stuff too. But sometimes uh, I've learned enough from uh, by experience in teaching. The student will ask questions because they're trying to escape something that they don't want to have to do,
Mm-hmm.
and so I kind of do that. And but what I'm asking you is like, what do you practice now? You said you're getting about an hour and a half in these days. Like, what does that practice session look like?
Pretty much, uh, I try and spend as little time as possible futzing around and deciding what to practice. So what I like to do is a little bit of a I have a little bit of OCD going on where I like to be as efficient as I can. So I do think this is good advice. An example, and it's always good to think about, extremes. It's not productive for an hour to try reeds. That is not what you want. If you know it.
That's why you don't play bassoon anymore.
That's a good point. I'm totally serious. When I heard about that whole reed making thing, I said,
Oh, yeah, 50% of your practice making reeds.
exactly. Who needs that? That's not for me. So I am all about, I have my little projects. So tunes I've been working on of late. I mentioned Hot House. Um, what's the head on all the things you are? I'm so bad with titles. That's my age. Um, it's a Kenny Dorm head with a Latin bridge. That one. A couple. I have a head that I wrote on confirmation that I play in 12 keys, and of course confirmation. I'm telling you, I never learned confirmation properly until I learned it in 12 keys, and I realized I really don't know it. I was just sort of faking it for 40 years. So I brought up the bird recording, and I finally learned it. This is the kind of stuff that I hate to say it, but I've just been kind of skating on for years and years because I just had a little bit more on my plate than permitted me to be able to really dig into something like that to the extent that I needed to and wanted to. So I will just pick up the horn and put on, I've been using this, you familiar with this Drum Genius app?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really cool.
Man, this thing has changed my life. I love it. So I just put on, I have a couple. I have a Mickey Roker one. There's like thousands. I have Mickey Roker playing like medium tempos and Ed Blackwell playing medium to up. That's all I even use. And so I just put that on and I practice whatever I'm working on. So I practice, Joy Spring at a medium tempo for probably takes about an hour to play the head and to play a few choruses. And of course, I there's always a decision about, am I going to pretend like that was okay and move on, or am I going to back up and fix it and try and perfect it to where I think I'm okay to move on to the next key. So there's always that struggle too. And that's basically what I do, unless I have something coming up, and then I just kind of put all that to the side and I work on what I'm going to be performing. That's it. So I don't generally work on, let's just say, for instance, what I would suggest that a student work on, which is a arpeggio scale routine from, for instance, the book that I work from around the horn. I just don't have that kind of time. And my feeling is that um, if I really felt like I needed to back up and do something, I would. I mean, I have done that. I have done that. In little bits and pieces. If I decide that, let's say I'm faking this sixth mode of melodic minor half diminished. I need to just go back and make sure that I'm not faking it. But I don't sit and do the half an hour routine that I would prescribe to a student. So my practice is basically in the category of, I'm playing a tune ahead in 12 keys and playing on the changes, or I am practicing material for an upcoming performance.
Yeah, again, I think something that's happened is, in addition to you sort of getting closer to the top of that uh, triangle or that pyramid that I was talking about. Um, so not only has it manifested in you sort of reducing and really focusing on tenor, but it seems like it's done the same thing in your practicing, where where you've kind of distilled and boiled it down to like really critical things that I need to do at least this stuff, and this
That's
is where I
true.
get the most results. You know,
That's
so
true, and I've learned what I need to do,
right.
and on the job, nobody cares if I'm playing Hot House in 12 keys. They want to hear what they want to hear, and so that means that I got to put that kind of ethereal ivory tower stuff off to the side and
Hmm.
play these tunes that I've written 30 years ago that I've played 1,000 times, but it doesn't mean that it's easy to do, and I need to get back in there and shed that.
I'm trying to think of this tune. It was one of your tunes that I transcribed when I was in college. It's an up-tempo tune. Oh, I can't think of the name of it right now. Maybe I'll remember it later.
What
Uh,
record's it on?
I can't even tell you that. I can't even tell you that.
Well, they all kind of sound alike.
Oh no, no. It wasn't on the, what is it? Was it the Nonet? Was it Octet or Nonet record that you did?
Could be.
Oh
Yeah.
well, it's not on.
Is
It's
it
not that one. It's not on that record.
oh,
uh, I'm reducing it backwards. But anyhow, I mean, I'll probably remember like when we finish. Um, but uh, that was something else that I thought was a really gracious um, offering when I was a student. So I started recording when I was 14. So I had a couple records out by the time I was in school, and you traded me for a couple of my projects.
wow.
You traded me even up, and to this day, I keep thinking to myself, that has got to be maybe the nicest thing that anyone can do. I mean, because at that point, I mean, I was composing and playing and stuff, but my product was nowhere near as polished or as, you know, um, really hitting the target that you were aiming for. Mine was, I was still kind of figuring out who I was and stuff, and so I just, I wanted to say thank you again for that gesture. It was very
Well,
encouraging to me too, because it made me feel like,
I was very inspired by you. Believe me, having a person who, I mean, at the time you were what, 18 or 19 years old. that was inspiring to me. To me that was totally foreign because I remember how I was at that age, and I literally had no idea. I knew what I wanted to do, and of course we're different generations. But you also obviously were and are a huge talent, and I've always been a little bit more slow and steady, and uh, feel that I in my organization have been able to perfect. Not that it's ever perfect, but um, be able to be competent craftsman and craft a tune and know how to prepare and practice. That's really what I always say. This is useful. There's really kind of primary talent, which is, for lack of a better terminology, you're born with a certain aptitude. That's primary talent. But how you organize yourself is really what what makes it and what determines the extent of your success. Without that, you can have all the natural talent you want. It really doesn't matter. It's all about how you organize yourself and how you prepare and how you practice.
Yeah, I know you're probably familiar with that Malcolm Gladwell uh, Outliers
Yes,
book.
I am.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a
so
great book.
it really is. And one thing I think that is compelling from that book is he discusses sort of, because we all know some like freakish natural ability kid that never had to practice or anything, and he was like born with a clarinet and a map of Europe or something.
Mhm.
It's just crazy skill people that never worked on their sight reading, and it's just like it's nothing. We all know these weird stories like this. Um, but what he talks about is you need to have a certain amount of natural ability for this 10,000 hours principle to apply. You need, but you don't need to be the best person, the most
Exactly.
natural ability or anything like that. And probably the level of natural ability is probably a lot lower than we think it would need to be able to be uh, critically influential.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and it can. I think that a certain amount, a huge amount of natural talent, that can be like a bucking bronco. We've all known
Mm.
hugely talented people. Uh, in a way, it can be too much of a burden, and I'm not that guy, and I'm kind of grateful in a way. I have known throughout the course of my life and my career people who were hugely talented and they just couldn't manage it. They couldn't manage their personal life. They couldn't consequently manage their practice and preparation to the extent that they could be professional. And so that's another discussion. But it's also when you have some talent and you recognize talent in others, that can be intimidating. When I heard you play, I was intimidated. But to me, that was a wake up call, and it would be I think it would be a disadvantage if I didn't recognize that there was that spark, that huge talent, because I can be inspired by it and I can relate to it, and to a certain extent be intimidated. But then you can translate that into motivation.
I can't believe that Walt Weiskopf just told me that he was intimidated by me.
Well, I
Oh
didn't
my
expect that. I,
goodness.
you know, I thought I was going out to some, place in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I knew Trent, but when I went out there, um, I didn't expect to run into someone like you, uh, and I was, I mean, I wasn't really prepared for it, and it was, to me, it was an inspiration. It's always inspiring to hear. You want to be. Uh, I mean, this is tangential, but when you think about what was so amazing about Charlie Parker is that the people he was playing with were not on his level by and large. And we're used to being able to play with people who really push us and kick us. I don't think he had that for the most part. He was dragging them along. And for me, when I began to come up and try and play, I was really scared to play with local people who weren't maybe I don't want to put myself on any kind of level, but they didn't have the same experience. That made me the most self-conscious and the most nervous, and that I think takes a little bit of a. I didn't want to play any gig unless I could have my guys, but the reality is that's just not practical. A lot of the time, it's great, you can do it, but that wasn't my experience. I really had to get good at making a product out of an hour rehearsal with people who didn't know what you were really about. In some cases, they were excited to be there. In some cases, they might not have been too excited about it. But that's a whole other discussion. But when you think about how great Charlie Parker played with people who really were nowhere near, they didn't even understand what he was doing. Really, most of them had never heard anything like that. Of course, there are exceptions. I mean, we all know that there are great players too, but a lot of those guys were not on his level at all. But his part of his genius was just the naked conviction that he had, which I'm pretty sure was just powered by the fact that he prepared and practiced pretty much all day, every day.
Yeah.
He was just there was no question about how confident he was. Obviously, he had a lot of other issues, but I think that's something that a lot of young players miss. It's natural because we're so used to having an immediate, you turn on and something like a backing track, and it all sounds competent, but not to be missed is the fact that you have to repeat stuff again and again and again. If Charlie Parker hadn't done that, he wouldn't be able to play a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah.
It's not reasonable to assume that you could, I always say, could you start speaking Dutch right now? If I tell you to, why would you be able to do that? The reason that people are able to speak a language is because they do it a lot from a very young age. So music is something you can't just start doing it when you feel like it. It has to be learned, has to be practiced, and has to be maintained.
Yeah. The thing about Charlie Parker's practicing, unfortunately, other aspects of his life have significantly eclipsed, at least in the way that he's presented and represented, over the practicing. Womanizing, being a drunk, being an addict, and unreliable oftentimes because of his addiction and all of that stuff. And of course, the movie Bird, the Clint Eastwood movie, it sort of plays up that whole that aspect. It's like they don't show him practicing or his level of dedication to the music at all, and then all of a sudden he's in New York and he's the baddest cat on earth, and that's just not what happens.
No.
We could talk for so long, and I miss talking to you, and I feel like there's like 1,000 things to catch up on, and I hope that we can stay in touch and have some conversations at a later point. But I did want to ask you a little bit about some of you said a few of them, but some of the bands that you've played in, and in particular, I think a lot of people know who you are because of a certain band uh, that you play in, a kind of a sort of a pop band,
Oh,
not
Steely Dan.
really a pop band. Steely Dan, yeah. And a lot of, well, some really, really great tenor players have played in that band. Chris Potter played in that band, Michael Brecker. Um, and so I'd like you to talk about that, but I also want you to talk maybe about some of your sort of favorite experiences on the bandstand.
With those guys, you mean, or
Well,
just in general?
well, I want you to well in general, yeah. So I want you to talk about Steely Dan because I'm sure people want to hear about that. But then also, I'd like to hear you talk about just what some of your favorite experiences on the bandstand have been.
I guess there's so many. Um, I've been very very lucky, and I've had a lot of great experiences. It's hard to boil them all down, but certainly playing with Buddy Rich was great. I I really was not ready for that job at all, and somehow I hung in there. Um, with that band, we worked with Frank Sinatra in
Mm.
1982. That was amazing. And I worked with Sinatra later on, toward well, for the last 4 years that he worked before he retired, 1990, 94, I think. That was great, and that really didn't have very much to do with improvising. That was more about playing in a band and playing the parts. And I tell you, it was a thrill every single time. I carry that with me, and it's I feel very very fortunate. At the time, I said to myself, "This is great. I know it's great, and I'm never going to forget it." And I still look back on that very fondly. Had a lot of um, great tours. Is my friends and I kind of grew up playing with Toshiko Akiyoshi, Jim Snydero, Conrad Herwig, Brian Lynch, um, Dave Pietro. I mean, all these guys. We got to work with Frank West. He played lead alto on that band for many years. Scott Robinson, of course. I mean, these are all my guys from way back, and we had an absolute ball doing that. We were cutting our teeth and getting to travel the world. That was a ball. But I got the job with Steely Dan in 2000. Well, I did a record in 2002. Their last record as leaders called "Everything Must Go," and I began to tour with them in 2003. And again, I really had very little idea of what to do or how to function. Um, Looking back on it, that they were patient with me because I think fortunately, I had a lot of experience by that time, but I'd never played in a band like that, and certainly not at that level. But fortunately, they uh, both Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, huge jazz fans, and they wanted what we did as jazz musicians, which is pretty unusual. So I remember, I mean, I still go to Donald's dressing room when he's playing some obscure, McGuire Sisters recording from, 1945, and, checking out the harmony. And I would go to Walter Becker's dressing room and just to, I don't know, pop my head in. And he had, Eric Dolphy out to lunch on the sound system. And I mean, these guys were huge fans. They went and saw everybody back in the day. I mean, they went to the all the clubs. I mean, they went to the Vanguard and saw Mingus and Bill Evans, and that's where they learned their music. And the whole thing that they ended up doing was kind of it's almost I'm sure it wasn't an accident, but it was. I don't think that they really saw it coming. They were very bright people. Neither was a music major, and they came up with all this amazing music, which in a way I count that in the kind of the strata as when I played with these other great bands. When I played with Sinatra, I would just marvel at how beautifully crafted the arrangements were, and I feel the same thing with Steely Dan. Whenever I play these tunes, the arrangements they're just fun to play. I mean, it's just music that works so well. Uh, we have all been together now for, well, it's been basically the same band since almost 2003, definitely since 2006, and we've had a lot of fun together. And we all know this music, and we can play it like we know it, which is a treat. It's an honor. So I feel very, very fortunate to have that experience. But I really feel like I got better at it. I really, when I hear myself back playing in 2003, I sound very, to me, too many notes, not really able to step back and observe how it's much more, obviously it's a whole different craft than playing in a jazz club. When I'm playing, 50 courses of rhythm changes, it's entirely different. I learned when I began to hear myself back in a big venue that you start playing a whole lot of notes, it just sounds like, when it's out in the hall, it just is not heard. And I do feel like I've gotten better at that, and it feels good to be able to do the job well. And it's always challenging, and sometimes I feel good about it, and sometimes I feel like I really stepped on it, and I can't wait to get back and try it again.
Well, is there anything else that you want to say? Maybe uh, something maybe you want to plug, or just a thought that you wanted to mention.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity, Sean. It's been such a great pleasure to sit and talk with you, and I hope we can, obviously, we'll stay in touch and do it again. My album, Introspection, is coming out. First one will be out. It's coming out the 22nd of May. It's going to be on all the platforms, Spotify, etc. I recorded Jimmy Rolls' The Peacocks, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's a beautiful masterpiece of a ballad. That's the first one that's coming out. And then in June, you're going to be familiar with Duke Pearson's You Know I Care, which I also have gotten to love playing that tune. So those are the first two, and then the whole thing will come out in July. And I'm excited about that. And other than that, I'm looking forward to, I'm sure as you are, getting back out there and blowing the horn for some people.
Behind me on this screen behind me, that's Walt's website, and I'm going to link that in the description to this video, so you can quickly and easily find his website, and you can also there's a portal to buy his books on his website also. So please do that. It's great information. It's been transformational information for me, and thank you, Walt Weiskopf. Thank you so much for your time, and I pray for you and your family, and in our world, that we can get out of this thing as soon as possible, and that we can get back to doing what it is that we love, which is being on
Thanks
the
again.
stage in front of an audience.
Me too, brother. Thank you so much.
All right, man. You have a good one.
Thanks, Sean.
All right, you have a good one.